everybody. Welcome. This is our third week of our winter webinar series. We're really excited to have everyone here. This week, we're going to be talking about long-term care insurance essentials. Long-term care policies are making a comeback. They are becoming more affordable, more user-friendly, so it's definitely something to get caught up on. Before we get into our presentation, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. I do have the cloud recording that I can send out. If you want a copy of the slides from tonight's presentation, just shoot me an email. You'll get my email at the end of the presentation. You can email me and I'll be happy to share the slides with you. Everybody has been muted. That way we can keep down any background noise and just move along with our presentation. Tonight's speaker is Hector Pou. I'm really happy that Hector could join us. He's a colleague that I work with an awful lot. He's a geriatric care manager. He's a very passionate advocate for his clients. Hector has 30 years of experience as a social worker, and he's also has experience as an administrator working with families and older adults. He helps people navigate all the elder care issues that pop up. As we know, it's very complicated to age. It can be very expensive, and Hector is a treasure trove of knowledge when it comes to this area. Not only does he know a lot about long-term care policies, but he's very well versed in Medicaid eligibility, entitlement programs. So we're really happy to have Hector here with us to share his knowledge of long-term care policies. And we are going to talk about 3 topics tonight. So first is, what is long-term care insurance? How does it work? And how do I buy these policies? So Hector, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'll control the slides for you. You just let me know when to change them and I'll be happy to do that.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I hope everybody is situated nice and warm. And I'm here in New York, in upstate New York in Orange County, where we had about 2.5 inches of snow. So we're supposed to get some more, but at least we're indoors and not having to deal with shoveling or the cold and ice on the streets. I'm very happy this evening that Alyssa invited me to do this presentation. As she mentioned, this is something that I have been working with long-term care insurance for a number of years. And although I do, my main focus of my practice has been Medicaid planning, it has turned out that long-term care is actually right behind that in terms of assisting my clients with managing and navigating the long-term care insurance claim filing and troubleshooting for them as it becomes much more complicated and as we go forward. Basically, again, as Alyssa mentioned, it's going to be broken up into 3 areas. And our first area is, what is long-term care? Essentially, it's when an individual is unable to care for themselves and basically their activities of daily life. And these activities of daily life include eating, bathing, dressing, feeding themselves, toileting, and a big area is ambulation as well. Do you need assistance with getting around your house using a walker or a wheelchair or other assistive device? Also, cognitive decline is another area where long-term care insurance becomes quite important in terms of providing care for yourself at home if this is where you want to be. It's the long-term care insurance sometimes is very funny, and I'll get into this a little bit later in regards to assessing cognitive needs. It's a very gray area. It's not that they don't understand people need assistance with cognitive decline, but often in the early stages of cognitive decline, people are fairly independent with activities of daily life. They just need a lot more reminding and cueing. So a lot of policies, one of the areas to look for is what's called safety supervision. And that's an important piece of assisting someone who is experiencing cognitive decline. And obviously individuals with Alzheimer's, it is a progressive illness, and things do worsen over the period of time of the illness. Okay, Alice, you can go forward. Why do we purchase long-term care insurance policies? Well, we are living longer. Although today's, there was some information on the decline of life expectancy in the United States due to the COVID. But we are living longer. Most people are living into their 80s or longer. Many of the clients that I assist who have long-term care insurance, some are in their 90s. So people are living longer and will need assistance to probably remain at home, which is what most people wish to do as they age in place. Regular insurance does not cover long-term care. This is one of the areas that's created a lot of confusion because most people may have life insurance, but life insurance does not cover long-term care, although I'll get into a little bit more of the conversation because life insurance policies are changing as people's needs at home become greater. And also, of course, the high care of care. At home, it's typically less expensive. Nursing home care can cost anywhere, at least in New York, anywhere from $10,000 to $12,000 a month, which is extremely, extremely prohibitive for most people to afford. Okay, Alyssa. Some of the options for long-term care policies is assisted living. Most people who prefer to live in a more structured environment do seek assisted living facilities. And at assisted living facilities, basically, the facility will provide all your needs for you, particularly when it comes to feeding and dressing and maintaining yourself in a safe environment. There are two types of assisted living programs in the country. Most know them as assisted living facilities. And under Medicaid, there are programs called assisted living programs or ALFs. And long-term care insurance does assist in both covering the cost of some of the care in an assisted living facility. Medicare does not cover long-term care. That is a common fallacy. The way Medicare is set up is really short-term services after an acute rehab stay or a hospitalization where you need skilled services of a nurse or a physical therapist. But typically today in these type of situations, Medicare will only cover care for about a month or so and very limited services of an aid, typically maybe 2 to 3 days a week, 2 to 3 hours a day. So you can see this is where long-term care insurance becomes an important part of your long-term planning. Also, it conserves assets. One of the things that people would want to do as they age is to have a legacy left behind for their children or grandchildren. And long-term policies do assist with assisting people to preserve assets. And this is an area where Alyssa does a lot of work in assisting with that planning. Okay, Alyssa, go forward. The long-term care policies, life insurance policies, I think most people are familiar with, have been around since the beginning of time. I remember as a little boy, the Prudential agent coming to my father's door, and my father would pay $5 a week or whatever it was at that point in time, which I thought was an extreme amount of money. So this is how people used to call them penny policies or nickel policies, because they provided some care, but not a lot. Back in the mid-1980s, these long-term care policies became very, very popular. And basically, if you are part of the baby boomer generation, that period of right after World War II, in the mid 80s, most baby boomers started, the early part of the baby boomers started to turn 40. And they were starting to worry about, how am I going to take care of myself when I get older and need services? So many of the major players started to create these long-term policies. And the major players, as you can see on the slide, were John Hancock, MetLife, and Genworth. Some of these are still around, but have morphed into different products or different agencies. And I'll get into that a little bit later in the presentation. But I also have a quick story to tell you too about my experience back, it's not included on this list, but good old General Electric, who used to make our light bulbs, got into the insurance business back in about 1990. And I received a call from General Electric, from a marketer, that they wanted to interview me for an insurance salesman position. So I'm questioning them, wait a minute, why approach me? And it says, well, we realize that people who work in the home care industry, which I did at that time, nurses and social workers, could be better salesmen of long-term care insurance, because you can explain the pratfalls and the pitfalls of taking care of yourself at home as you age in place. It was a very tempting offer at that particular period of time, but I didn't see myself as an insurance salesman. So, I let GE go into the sunset, but it was very, very interesting how that all was evolving at that period of time. Okay, Alyssa. A lot of people are not aware of this. When the Affordable Care Act was brought before Congress about 10 years ago, they explored Medicare offering a long-term care option. However, it was too costly at the time, and it was one of the parts of the Affordable Care Act that were not included in what was ultimately passed. The current situation now, because of the cost of living and so on, as I mentioned, life insurance policies, not long-term care policies, life insurance policies are offering benefits and allowing individuals to access their policy much earlier than they would normally would, and are written now to include some long-term care benefits. Okay, Alyssa. How does all this work? I'm sure all of you have a lot of questions. There is an application process like every other benefit that we do access. It is not a cumbersome application process. It's basically, they're asking for demographics. They do request your medical information regarding your doctor and physicians that you're seeing. The agency, the insurance company, will reach out to your physicians for more medical information to start the application process. And it's very simple. You just call in. If you have long-term care insurance, you just call in your policy holder, and they will walk you through the process. And I have found that it's not difficult, and the call itself can be done in 10 minutes of time. And then that, of course, triggers letters and other pieces of the documentation process that will be forwarded to you as part of the eligibility process. One of the key pieces of this is the nursing and/or a social work assessment. And as I touched on a little bit earlier, the activities of daily life, here is when they do come into play. One of the tips I suggest is, based on my experience in working with families and applying for Medicaid services, most people do want to place their best foot forward during these assessments. And that's a normal thing, because you're being interviewed and you're being asked about how you're performing and how you're doing at home managing your daily needs. And most people are uncomfortable to say, I'm having difficulty. But my recommendation always is to be straightforward and list what your needs are, because that is an important part of this process. And these ADLs are those activities of daily life, including eating, dressing, bathing, cooking, and very importantly, ambulation. The policies do require, for the most part, that you need assistance with at least 2 activities of daily life. And this goes back to the area that I touched with cognitive decline, that often safety supervision in of itself is not sufficient, and that they look for two activities of daily life that you need help with. So you have to be very, very clear in terms of during this assessment process that these are the areas of daily living that I need help with, not also including safety supervision, particularly with declining in cognitive abilities. So go ahead, Alyssa, go forward. Now, an elimination period, most people, if you think of your automobile insurance, you have a deductible. And most people know this, your deductible may be $500 or $1,000 after an accident. And that is your responsibility. And then your insurance picks up the difference at that point in time. Long-term care insurance essentially has what's called an elimination period. And I found that kind of confusing at the beginning, but all policies have this piece in their requirements. On average, most policies today are written with either a 90 to 120 day elimination period. I have seen policies that were written 20 years ago, as we mentioned earlier, long-term care policies, insurance policies became I've seen elimination periods as little as 15 days. So, and how it works is whatever your elimination period is, that during that period of time, your insurance, the long-term care insurance, will not pay for your care. That's an important piece to remember. You still have to submit claims to show that you are having care expenses at home for your needs. And then the policy, once you've met that criteria, then the policy kicks in after, typically, as I said, after the 90 days. Most companies have their own claim forms that they use in terms of submitting these claims. They're typically structured in a way where you would list the name of the provider or the caregiver that's providing the care, the date of service, how many hours of service a day are being given, and the cost of care. The policies, the way they're written, many of them have an average daily rate. And that, again, goes back to how much you want to spend on these policies. So it's not only the elimination period, but all of them do provide an average daily rate, which can range from $100 a day to, I've seen policies where they can cover up to $1,000 a day. And I'll get into that a little bit more a little later. Premium payments, when your elimination period is met, typically most policies are written that your monthly payments will no longer be necessary because you're accessing the benefit. So your premium payments do stop at the point of when you're accessing your benefit. And the final point, and Alyssa may be able, you might say something related to this. Some policies in some states do offer tax advantages to have these policies. And essentially, if the state that you're residing in considers long-term care premiums as a medical expense, then you can claim that on your taxes. So the premium may be high, but you'll have the advantage of being able to claim that on your income taxes. Listen, I don't know if you've run into that at all with your planning with your clients,
I don't know.
long-term care policies.
I don't know too much about this and the tax advantages yet, because a lot of people now are starting to have more interest in the policies because they can afford them again.
Right.
So I guess that's something that's on the horizon, but I don't know a whole lot about the tax advantages with these policies.
Yeah, it might be an area that you might want to discuss with your CPA in regards to your various states, because I know on the, and I'm getting my taxes ready for submission. On the federal side, there is medical, an area of medical deduction where you itemize. You can itemize your medical deductions, such things such as dental, your doctor bills, out-of-pocket expenses not covered by insurance. You have to meet certain thresholds based on your income.
Well, exactly. And to that point, it's just medical expenses. What you can deduct is a certain percentage of your income. So when you're in your retirement years and your income is much lower, these expenses that you're paying for medical bills, and if your premiums are counted towards that, that could be a huge write-off on your taxes.
Right, exactly.
That's something to explore with your accountant to see. You know, it might depend on how, you know, what kind of policy you have, how are these premiums, what are they considered, and are they eligible for a write-off?
Yeah, getting back, and I wanted to highlight something in terms of the submitting the claims, that every policy is written differently, and there are across the industry, and I've seen policies in almost all the major players in long-term care. Many of them are written pretty much the same. But one of the areas where you might get into a little bit of trouble is who is the caregiver and what is the caregiver's training in terms of providing care. Some policies are written that the caregiver must be attached to either what's known as a certified agency under Medicare or a licensed agency under that work with Medicare. The majority, I will tell you from my experience, and I deal with Genworth, with Bright House, with Unum, not GE, CNA, that if the aid is certified in the state where the services have been provided, typically a home health aid certification, and that's submitted, and the insurance companies accepts the individual's credentials, then that person becomes your primary caregiver, and you do not have to go through an agency. So that's something that I have discovered in assisting my clients in submitting claims to long-term care insurance. Okay, Lisa. Now, how to buy policies. Well, factors to consider. The cost of these policies do vary. We do recommend that you do your due diligence and approach the companies that you're interested in and get quotes. But some of the factors that do come into consideration are your age, if you're married, your health, obviously, and these things do determine the cost of the policy. Obviously, if you can afford it, the earlier is obviously the better it is, because it's going to reduce your cost, because over a period of time you're going to be putting more money into the insurance, and it reduces your out-of-pocket cost. Now, many employers, not all, many employers do offer this option. It doesn't come as part of the regular package of healthcare benefits. I've experienced that while I was working. But these are additional benefits that you can research on your own through your employer and have the advantage of your group rate being part of a group, being part of a group, that it does reduce your overall cost. So I think that's an important area to explore. And if you're not certain, you should speak to your human resources department to see if your current employer does have this option to explore long-term care purchasing. As I touched on a little bit earlier, I think all of us are familiar with life insurance policies and how they work. And you know, that the payout is typically at the point of when we pass on to the when we pass on. However, in the last few years, I've seen my clients show me policies that are written with the ability to use a portion of the benefit towards care at home. Now, they're not a long-term care policy. They're not written the same, but it is part of that you should research with your long-term. If you have life insurance, whether or not your policy can be accessed before your passing. And it is an advantage because people do have life insurance policies for many, many years, and they've accrued a lot of cash value, which can be applied towards your care. So speak to your insurance agents about this particular option on your policy. One of the more important and one of the major recommendations that I make with long-term care policies is to get an annual inflation rider. The typical annual inflation rider on these policies is 5%. And that may not sound like a lot of money, but I'll give you an example of clients that I've worked with. I had one individual recently who purchased their policy in 1990. So you're talking about nearly 30 years ago. They had a 5% rider. Their average daily rate for care that would be provided in the policy was $200 a day. Now, over a period of 30 years, that $200 a day now with the 5% rider, inflation rider, has become nearly $600. So it is very, very important. Unfortunately, I have one client, and you see so much in your practice, that was concerned because of the cost that this rider was providing, and every year would lower his annual inflation rider from 5% to 4% to 3%, and it was down to 1%. So when his family found out, there was unfortunately nothing they could do about that, and it limited the cost of the policy growing. And so even though it is a cost that's added and it is an option, my recommendation is to take that annual rider option. It's very, very important, because you're locking in care when you do need it and your policy grows in value. And this daily rate is very, very important, because the cost of care today at home can be upwards of $25 an hour for an aide, if not more. And the cost of care in an assisted living, as I touched earlier, can be as high to $7,000 to $10,000, as well as nursing home care can be extremely expensive. Again, life insurance policies we touched on already. Many of them are offering ability to access your benefit early on. So again, it's important to speak to your insurance provider. And the American Association for Long-Term Care does offer these price comparisons. So it's good to go out there and shop and see what policy offers you the best bang for your buck. Tips for buying the policies. Again, buy it early. If you can afford it, buy it early. And certainly this is where considering the employer option is a good one, because as you're progressing in your career and your job, other needs come into play. But certainly if you can consider buying a policy early on in your life, that's a very, very strong recommendation. And again, the employer option is a good deal because you have the advantage of a group policy rate. Now, the state partnership programs is something that I have not done much work with, but many of the states, including New York, where I am in, does have a state partnership. And the advantage of this program is if you go through the state program, it works with the Medicaid program, and your cost of the long-term care actually is reduced over a period of time. And it is a way that offers you some asset protection that you would normally not find during a regular Medicaid application. While preparing for this presentation, I did some research in New York, and apparently starting in 2021, New York has closed the availability of these partnership programs for the time being. I'm not sure why. It is probably due to budgetary constraints because of the COVID. But I would suggest that you do check with your individual states to see if they do have a partnership program. Again, life insurance versus long-term care policies. Here again is the shopping piece and price comparison. As life insurance policies are offering these ability to obtain benefits in the policy, it might be a good option for you. It might be less expensive as well. And what's been happening also in the industry with long-term care policies, a lot of the major players have gotten out and no longer are offering policies. Companies such as Genworth is a big one. MetLife now has their program administered through a company called Bright House. And recently I was reading that just this week, actually, it just happened to come across my desktop, that they were listing the 10 largest companies that have grown in the last 10 years, so to speak. And one of those companies was Bright House. It was the third largest company, a new company that has grown in the last 10 years. And Bright House, what it's done is manages the policies for many of the major players, such as MetLife and Genworth. John Hancock still remains the same. They are offering policies and they remain a big player in the long-term care insurance field. Medicaid eligibility. This is one of the things to consider in terms of long-term care policies. Medicaid eligibility, particularly in New York, is going to get much tougher as we move forward. Most people are familiar that there was a look back for, say, Medicaid for nursing home care. But New York is going to be starting a look back for community-based or home care services. So having a long-term policy might be a better way to go in terms of Medicaid eligibility if the states continue to curtail or make it much more difficult to be eligible for Medicaid.
We just talked about this.
Yeah, the state partnership programs. Exactly.
I will add that we've had some clients who have had the state partnership program policies, and when you get to the end and you start to exhaust your benefit, one of the perks of getting it through the state is it took a lot of your assets out of the equation for the Medicaid eligibility. And that's the incentive to buy these policies, is because later on when you need to get on Medicaid, your assets essentially aren't countable. So that was nice how your policy could dovetail into your Medicaid benefits. So it's definitely something that before you go and buy a policy, check to see if your state has this partnership program available. Because even if you can't afford a policy with all the bells and whistles, it might be worth it to get a cheaper policy, because at the other end is some asset protection for yourself. So does anyone have any questions about our presentation tonight? I want to thank Hector. That was great. I know a lot of people may not be familiar with long-term care is. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add, Hector, before we close for the evening.
Yeah, it's I think when you're in the process of considering these long-term care policies and just kind of rehashing, is to look at obviously including that annual inflation rider. That I find that that's such a key thing, because if you bought a policy now, let's say you're in your 50s, because that's the recommended age for most people today to begin to look at these long-term care policies, mid-50s, early 60s. If you think care is expensive now, what is it going to be like 20 years from now when you're going to access this benefit? Okay, so having that inflation rider, which will then bump up your daily rate of reimbursement considerably. And as I gave in my example, the woman who purchased her policy nearly 30 years ago, it went from a $200 a day benefit, which at that time seemed, I'm sure she saw it was handsome, to now a $600 a day benefit. I've seen, and I think I mentioned, I've seen one client's benefit actually went up to like $900 a day, which really covered the majority of all of his care, pretty much. So he was able to get more assistance at home than he would have normally thought he could get because of the average daily rate, and he had a very handsome inflation rider.
All right, well, if anyone has any questions, now is the time. If you want to put it in the chat or just unmute yourself, feel free to do that. If not, we will end our presentation here. If you want to reach out to us, I realize, Hector, that I did not include your contact information. I apologize. But if anyone wants to get in touch with Hector, please feel free to. Oh wait, here I did include.
Yes, you did. You did. I thought so.
This is
Yeah.
how to get in touch with Hector. You can find him at his website, his company, Elder Solutions and Planning. You can give him a shout or email him. He is a wealth of information. Hector knows a lot about a lot of things. Let's see. I have a question here. How do you find about state partnership programs? Just Google it. Google the state you're in and like New York long-term care partnership programs, and it will come up with more information.
Right. In New York, it'll come up under probably the New York State Department of Health, who kind of manages all these programs.
So you'll find probably most of the answers to life on Google. So yeah, email him, call him, go online, find his website. Hector is a great person to have in your back pocket if you're aging and need care and have questions. So he's an excellent resource. And then here's how to find us. We're on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn. Email me. We're very responsive. We have some resources on our website too. And that's it for this evening. So we thank you for coming. We are halfway through our webinar series. Next week, we're going to be talking about caregiving, how to take care of the caregiver. That's next week's presentation. Followed by the following week will be about retirement planning. And then the last week is what to do when a loved one dies. So we hope that you join us for our other presentations, and we'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you.